the statement by the Vice President of the Commission, High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. The situation of migrants in Libya is and so High Representative Mogherini, you have the floor.
As you see, for this debate, I am pleased to be joined by Commissioner Avramopoulos, as we were asked to cover both the external side of this situation and the internal work of the European Union, and obviously, as Commissioner Avramopoulos has the responsibility of our internal work on migration, he will complement my introduction and he will stay for the conclusions as well. We have all seen the images on CNN coming from the detention centres in Libya. Unfortunately, what the media reported is not new. We have discussed this in this hemicycle several times, and this is not the first time I tell you. Personally, I first heard the stories about the detention centres and the unthinkable violations of human rights a few years ago in Lampedusa. And I was surprised that the rest of the world was not strongly reacting to stories that were well known, not since a couple of weeks ago, since years. I heard them from people who had been tortured or had lost their loved one. I heard them from the NGOs, from doctors and humanitarian workers who had been in those centres. And if any of you have seen the movie Fuoco a Mare, that was, I believe, projected also in the European Parliament in Brussels, I've heard those stories because they are told and they're shown just in a movie. So nothing new, unfortunately. Nothing new, unfortunately. But
Mistään uudesta asiastahan tässä ei ole kyse, mutta kerron nyt siitä, mitä tapahtui sen jälkeen, kun oltiin pari vuotta sitten ensimmäistä kertaa nämä tarinat kuultu. No, myöhässä tällöinkin oltiin, koska EU:n olisi pitänyt reagoida aikaisemmin, mutta 2-3 vuotta sitten lähdettiin liikkeelle ja silloin päätettiin toimia. Ja tilanne ei suinkaan ollut helppo. Juuri ennen kuin media alkoi raportoida Libyasta, EU ryhtyi toimiin. Olimme yhteydessä YK:hon ja erityisesti kansainväliseen pakolaisyhteisön ja katsottaisiin, miten menetellä rantautuneiden pakolaisten suhteen. Ja toiminnan tulisi olla lähellä näitä pidätyskeskuksia, ja tämän olen nostanut esiin täälläkin viimeksi 2 kuukautta sitten, ja juuri näin on tarkoitus tehdä, mutta ei näitä asioita yhdessä yössä hoideta. Nyt IOM:n ja UNHCR:n kanssa olemme vuoden ajan toimineet, jotta saisimme toimia juuri Libyan alueelle, ja on tärkeää, että näille ihmisille annetaan mahdollisuus elää turvallisesti omassa maassaan.
Because in the detention centers,
sillä pidätyskeskusten elämää ei voi elämäksi kutsua. Ja Euroopan unionin
have assisted over 15,000 migrants who were trapped in Libya just in this year of work, that now have been able not only to go home with assisted voluntary returns supported by us and practically and operationally done by the IOM, but to start a new life. I give you one example. I was told the story of a group of 10 young men from the Gambia who went home from Libya thanks to our support, and with our funds they bought a small refrigerated truck and they are using it to deliver fish around the country. So this is just one little story, and it's one example out of thousands of good stories of voluntary and sustainable returns, and it's with stories like that that we show also to local communities that embarking in a dangerous journey is not only a risk, it's extremely dangerous, and you might end up in a worse place than the one you have left from. These are the kind of stories that I think we need to share and we need to tell. We believe this is the right way to do things: humane, sustainable, with the right international standards, in cooperation with the UNHCR and the IOM. Today, new partners are finally joining our work. The summit between the European Union and the African Union 10 days ago in Abidjan has been a turning point. Let me say it has been a turning point not only on this. It has been a key political summit for EU-African Union partnership. But this is not the issue we're discussing tonight. That is the 10th debate we can have around 1 o'clock tomorrow morning. But our African partners on this issue have realised that it was time to engage seriously. I believe our African partners have had enough of seeing their brothers and sisters dying in detention centres or along the route in the desert. They want to stop it and to stop the criminal networks that are making money out of death and slavery. We've set up a joint task force with the African Union, the European Union and the United Nations precisely to address the situation of migrants inside Libya, and the results already in these first 10 days are quite impressive. Right after we did that, in just 9 days, we have assisted almost 2,000 migrants in going back home from Libya voluntarily, with the assistance of the IOM. And there is a new awareness and a new common determination to act. So thanks to this, we aim now at transferring a further 15,000 people who are currently in the detention centres, and this would allow us to empty the current population in detention centres in the next few months. This is feasible. We have already assisted 15,000, 2,000 of which in the last 9 days, and we are aiming at transferring another 15,000 in the next couple of months with the practical work of the IOM and the cooperation of the African Union on the ground. But this is not enough. For some people, going back home is not an option because of war or of persecution. So for those who have the right to international protection, we need to open new avenues to come to Europe or to other safe places. The European Commission has proposed to welcome 50,000 people in need of international protection. And we've just launched a new programme with the UNHCR called the Emergency Transit Mechanism, and the first transfers have already taken place so that those who have the right to receive asylum can come safely to Europe instead of risking their lives. Is this enough? Clearly it isn't. Clearly it isn't. And it's frustrating every single person we don't manage to reach, every single place we don't manage to go. And you know the situation on the ground in Libya. Not easy for the IOM and the UNHCR or for the NGOs to go around even and simply, or to get access. Clearly it is not sufficient, it is not enough yet, and we need to continue working together, including with the Libyan authorities. We need to overcome once and for all the system of systematic detention. We must allow the complete and proper registration of migrants and prosecute the criminal groups who have smuggled and enslaved. I discussed this with President Sarraj this morning to prepare together the first meeting of this task force, European Union, African Union, United Nations, that I called for at political level for Thursday morning in Brussels. We will have this first operational meeting at the political level to accelerate our common work in Libya, but also beyond Libya, because the situation also further down, south, along the route, is not at all a rosy one. We, first of all the European Union, are working to put an end to death and exploitation, to reduce the risky journeys, to save lives at sea and in the desert, and to provide international protection to those who need it. We are also working hand in hand with the United Nations to make progress in the political process in Libya. Let me conclude with one word on this before I give the floor to Commissioner Avramopoulos to complete my remarks. The political process in Libya, this is the first and foremost for the benefit of the Libyans. And we tend sometimes with the European lenses to forget that Libya is not just a place where migrants are passing through or are detained. Libya is a country that has gone through very difficult times, is still in a very difficult situation, and the Libyans themselves need to see our political support to overcome the current situation. But, obviously, improved governance will also help address the migration challenge inside Libya. So the European Union is actively supporting the UN Action Plan at every stage. I met with President Sarraj 10 days ago in Abidjan and with the Special Representative Salamé in Rome 10 days ago. While there is not much progress to report yet, there is some movement in the right direction. But it is fragile and we need to stay resolute, particularly to support the Libya political agreement through and beyond the deadline of 17 December. So this job is clear, will not be done in a day. There will be bumps on the road and we will need long-term engagement, but we are on the right path. We are on the only possible path to manage migration in a more humane and sustainable way. And finally, we are not alone. We will continue to work with all our determination together with the African Union and the UN, in particular the IOM and UNHCR. Thank you.
Kiitos korkealle edustajalle.
Thank you to the High Representative, and we will now give the floor to Commissioner Avramopoulos. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, thank you very much for the invitation to discuss this very, very sensitive issue tonight here. I'm more than happy to be here and compliment the words said some minutes ago by my good colleague, Mrs. Federica Mogherini. This is the situation, as she described it. But I think on the ground it's even worse. And the images we saw on CNN recently do not reflect the reality. So we are conscious of what's happening there. But let me start by making this crystal clear. It is not the European Union's action that has created an inhumane system in Libya. For far too long, these unacceptable, appalling conditions have existed there. So, quite on the opposite, it is the European Union that, together with its international partners, is coordinating the efforts to address and improve the situation on the ground. Our collective efforts cannot ensure from one day to another a result which equals our expectations. But with our joint and international cooperation, we hope to achieve results in the short to medium term. We are working in a very difficult context, as you are all aware of. An inclusive political transition, along with the stabilisation and economic consolidation of Libya, remains a key prerequisite for addressing migration-related challenges in Libya in a sustainable way. Within this complex framework, we are managing to work in Libya on all possible fronts. Cooperating with third countries, especially in North Africa, is a cornerstone of the comprehensive migration policy that we proposed to step up in our contribution to the leaders' meeting this Thursday evening on the way forward migration. Jointly with IOM and UNHCR and other humanitarian organisations, we are focusing, firstly, to improve the conditions of the migrants stranded in the country. Secondly, to support their voluntary return and reintegration back home. And thirdly, to create legal pathways to Europe for people in need for international protection. I'm not going to repeat what Mrs. Mogherini already said about the registration and the humanitarian assistance on the ground, as well as for the voluntary return and reintegration of migrants to their own countries. I will focus on the legal pathways, which should become the preferred way for people in need of protection to reach safely in Europe. In mid-November, the first group of 25 of the most vulnerable persons needing protection were evacuated from Libya to Niger for their further resettlement to France. Thanks to the support of the UNHCR, to the EU funding and the consent of the governments of both Libya and Niger. With the EU support, more evacuations from Libya to Niger will be carried out by UNHCR in the next weeks to come. As announced in our roadmap presented last week, our target is to reach 1,000 by the end of February. The continuous evacuation of people trapped in Libya depends on several factors. It is of course linked to the capacity of our member states together with other destination countries, to rapidly resettle from Niger the asylum seekers evacuated. As you know, in September, the Commission called on the Member States to make available at least 50,000 resettlement places in the next 2 years for asylum seekers located in some priority countries. This, of course, includes the countries of the central Mediterranean route. Member States replied in a very encouraging manner, offering until now almost 40,000 new resettlement pledges, and we are confident that additional pledges from Member States who have not yet replied to our call will be offered. But meanwhile, has already arrived the moment to start fulfilling these pledges, and I count on the support of the European Parliament in reminding the agency. I also count on your support for the target we proposed to the leaders that 25,000 resettlements take place before October 2018. In parallel, we continue to help the Sahel countries to better manage their borders and reinforce their capacities in relation to the fight against migrant smuggling and trafficking human beings. I understand that there are still concerns for the efficiency of our collective action on the ground. As the Amnesty International today reported, instead, I would call for more and stronger joint cooperation of all actors and partners, since we all aim the same objectives: stability in the region, unity in Libya, solidarity and practical support of the people in need. I am looking forward to exchanging views with you tonight. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now we will give the floor to the different political groups, and Santiago Fisas Aijela will now have the floor on behalf of the EPP group for 1.5 minutes.
Madam High Representative, Commissioner, the images we're seeing on the media show sub-Saharan immigrants who are being put up for auction at the gates of Europe, and they're scandalous. The European Union and its member states have firmly condemned the inhumane situation that traffickers submit immigrants to through Libya. It's calculated there's between 400,000 and 700,000 people who are living in these degrading conditions. I do welcome, though, the reaction of the Union, the African Union and the UN as a part of the recent Abidjan summit, and their decision to find a solution to this problem, as well as commitments to help the Libyan authorities to tackle this very serious problem. What's needed is a comprehensive migratory policy, bringing in transit countries and countries of origin. Together with migratory flow, we need development and cooperation policies with our African partners, with investments, with institutional consolidation and protection of human rights. A policy that generates opportunities so that people don't need to immigrate to have a dignified future, so that they can open businesses themselves rather than be the business of organized crime. For Libya, perhaps we should have an inclusive policy to stabilize the country. The Union should be fully involved and should support the efforts of the UN representative to have political association for a united, peaceful Libya. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, on behalf of the S&D group, Elena Valenciano. And I have to tell you that we are running late, so I will have to ask you to keep to the time you have been allocated. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. I will meet the allotted time. Well, it's an inferno, Libya. That is what people say who managed to escape. kidnapping and sexual abuse and other types of abuse. The documentary published by the CNN hasn't really discovered anything new. But just like that cruel picture of Aylan, which you may remember, has actually made us all aware of the situation. So let us take advantage of this particular situation so that we can explain what the European Union is really doing in this area. But it is important to make sure that the protection of human beings is more important than protection of our borders. That is the difference between those who think in this way and those who are simply obsessed with security and border control without thinking of human beings. The question is what to do in Libya. There is no state, there is no structure, there are no spokespersons or interlocutors. How can we solve this problem? There's a great concern about what we're doing in Libya and how we're doing this and with whom we're doing this. And this can only be solved through more transparency. This is a debate which gives us this opportunity. The situation of the country does not make it possible for us to face up to the human crises. Returns is a good idea, but what opportunities do these people have? To what extent are we prepared to share the responsibilities on this side of the Mediterranean? Or are we systematically going to be moving the problem away? Are we just going to be kicking it over our borders? I mean, economic migration is a euphemism. People are trying to find a bearable way of living. So once again, Europe needs to be clear. Europe needs to make sure that it develops a sustainable immigration policy for its own survival. We need to open up more legal channels for immigration. I need to say this out loud, but we've said it so often. The High Representative has already said this, but we need to create an association with the countries of origin and countries of transit to share projects and shoulder responsibilities. Thank you.
Kiitos, rouva Valencia.
Thank you, Mrs. Valenciano. On behalf of the ECR group, Jussi Halla-aho, 1 minute. Thank you, President. The situation of migrants in Libya that are seeking to illegally enter Europe is tragic. However, offering a legal route to Europe is not the solution, as, amongst others, the President of the Commission, Mr. Juncker, has proposed. There will be people coming to Libya as long as Europe attracts them with poor border control, generous asylum policy, and ineffective return practices. It is time to do something about these issues. Poverty is the reason that sets people on the move from sub-Saharan Africa. High birth rates are one of the main reasons poverty has not been eradicated. It is estimated that the population of Africa will grow from the current billion to 4 billion by the end of the century. Moving to Europe is not a solution. Europe has not been able to integrate the comers, and the situation will only get worse. Thank you, Mr. Halla-aho. And on behalf of the ALDE group, Sofia Intveld, 1.5 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I didn't fully get that, but Mrs. Mogherini, who left in the meantime, Mr. Avramopoulos, thank you for your introduction. I insisted particularly on your presence here, because I think we have to make it very clear that what we're talking about is not external policies, it is migration policies, and I think it is, let's say, politically relevant that we show that this is a migration debate and that we're not outsourcing the problem, although that is exactly what member states want to do. We've all been shocked by the images of Amnesty International, but as Mrs. Mogherini rightfully said, it's not the first time. And every time we, like you said, we express our horror, we are shocked, and then we basically move on. Now, I know, Mr. Avramopoulos, you are personally very committed to a proper EU migration policy, but there's one thing that you said that I disagree with, saying basically, you know, we are not to blame for this. And it is true that the atrocities are committed in Libya by Libyan people and not by Europeans. But it is also a consequence of our policy choices. And we also know that a lot of funding from the EU, but also from Italy, is going into Italy, ending up in the pockets of God knows who. Militias, terrorists, corrupt politicians. We've seen the images of a boat used by the Libyan Coast Guard that has been funded by Italy. So it is our money going into that misery. So let's stop funding the misery. Then I also would like to hear a little bit more about the rescue operation. Where are these people going if they're not yes, I'm coming to a conclusion, Madam Chair. If these people are not repatriated. And then finally, Mr. Avramopoulos, I would like to know, remarks have been made in the margin. Yes, Madam Chair, can I please finish my sentence? We're talking about human rights here, something close to your heart as well. Okay? It's late anyway. I would like to know, because you've said a lot about legal pathways.
Mrs. Intveld, you have 1.5 minutes. You have spoken for 2 minutes now.
This is what we urgently need. Stop the fiction of Fortress Europe. We need legal avenues for labour migration. Thank you.
Of course, this is an important issue, but I have to treat all members in the same way. You spoke way over the allocated time you had. On behalf of the GUE NGL group, Barbara Spinelli, you have 1.5 minutes.
Thank you. I have 3 questions to the Commissioner. Firstly, the European Court's ruling on 2012 on the Ricci case. Italy was condemned for what happened in Italy, and the situation's the same. The European Convention is being breached, and Libya hasn't ratified the Geneva Convention. Where's the difference between 2009 and now, really, then? Secondly, the decision taken in Abidjan to evacuate the camps where there is violence and to have voluntary returns of refugees and resettle them. I'd like to know what procedures will be used to ensure that people don't have to choose between Scylla and Charybdis, and the number of people being evacuated because the UNHCR has said the number of people being tortured is unknown, and that only a minimum amount of territory can be controlled. In other words, the Abidjan statements won't hold up. Every time we release people from detention camps, somebody else immediately takes their place. Final question. How is it going with redefining the non-refoulement principle that was suggested by the Union in Valletta? This is something that was dropped from the release, and I'm wondering whether it's still on the agenda or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Spinelli. On behalf of the Greens, Judith Sargentini, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam. I remember that Commissioner Wallström, and this is in 2010, paid a visit to Libya in order to look at the refugees who were living under very serious conditions, the Eritrean refugees. Gaddafi was sending them back to Eritrea, and there were agreements between Berlusconi and Gaddafi simply to prevent the immigrants from sailing across the Mediterranean, and Eritreans were really in danger. Commissioner Wallström really did make everything. She moved everyone to make sure that people could be saved. Now again, there seem to be seedy deals between Italy and Libya, but I understand that the Commission and others are also involved. The Libyan safeguard has never, the Coast Guard has never really been equipped so well, paid by Europe. If they carry out rescue operations, well, even more people drown. And we know what happens in Libyan detention camps. It's a lot worse than in 2010. And at the moment, we're actually filling up these camps ourselves. It's true that we're also saving people. Since the summit in Abidjan, I spoke to people who just returned from Libya, and they told me horror stories. One man had been saved at sea by the Libyan Coast Guard, had been taken to a detention camp, had been sold, had been working on the land as a slave, and when he spoke to his mother to make sure that he could be released, he was actually being struck by knives. So, of course, he was saved at sea. He did not drown. And through the special rescue fund, he was paid to be returned to the Ivory Coast, and also for its integration. I think that's cynical. Thank you.
Kiitos, Rouva Sargentini.
Thank you, Mrs. Argentini. On behalf of the ENF Group, Mario Borghesio, 1 minute.
Thank you very much, President. The High Representative has only told us part of the truth in describing the journey of these migrants, economic migrants, that Europe has saved from the sad experience of deathly trips through the Mediterranean. It's true. They're given to the country of departure and they have temporary passports, and so they go back to Guinea or whatever, and that all works. But the High Representative hasn't told us why that happens, because of the work that's being done and the agreements of the Italian government, whereby the Libyan Coast Guard can catch these boats that the smugglers use to smuggle migrants. But there is then as well another point, and I am concluding, and that is what happens under Libyan competence, because you get migrants arriving in Italy on NGO boats, for example, and they're dispersed through Italy and then the rest of Europe. So really you've only solved half of the problem. The other half...
Thank you, Mr. Borghesio. Now the groups have spoken and we can go forward to the members, and the first speaker is Fleckenstein.
Madam President, wir begrüßen als ersten.
The first important step is the step by the Prime Minister to ensure that there is full access by the UNHCR to camps in his area, and it's not going to be sufficient around Tripoli because the government really in that region doesn't have a grip on the region, and the fact that there are these slave markets. Access is by other militias. At the last EU-Africa summit in November, there were talks about emergency measures, and these must now be carried out with urgency. The IOM, according to that plan, is to help migrants return to their own countries, and the EU will be providing financial aid to assist in this return. But that's not sufficient on its own. We have to put further development programs in place in the countries of origin, and we must ensure that there are legal channels by which it is possible to gain access to the European Union. Those in need of protection because of political persecution must be brought into safety in Chad and Niger, and there must be resettlement of people in need to neighbouring countries in Africa or in the EU. Let me try and sum up now. In the medium term, it is Libya that must look into measures that would provide security, and that we must at the same time look at legal channels. It cannot be the case that there is such a lack of solidarity within Europe that a joint migration policy is not going to be possible.
Kiitos, herra Fleckenstein. Ja seuraava...
Thank you, Mr. Fleckenstein. Next is Marek Jurek. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. High Representative Mogherini said that we have known for a long time what is happening in Libya. We do not need CNN for this. So the question arises, what we have been doing. I remember that 2.5 years ago, the European Council was saying that we will start our combat against the trade in human beings. Because we can see what is happening. The whole fleet run by Soros. We know that these people were encouraged in Africa to embark on this route to this Libyan trap. And now we really need some practical measures. We need to help these people, and I am glad that we discussed this. But if we do not bring back the responsibility, including political responsibility, when it comes to the operations of the European Union, these tragedies will change places, but they will multiply. So I would like to repeat once again, the time is high for responsibility. We should think about the consequences of our nice words. Thank you very much.
Kiitos, herra Jurek. Ja
Thank you, Mr. Jurek. Javier Nart, you have the floor for 1.5 minutes. He is not here. We will move forward. Marie-Christine Vergia has the floor for 1.5 minutes.
Merci. Thank you. Last weekend, 450 people were helped by SOS Mediterranean at sea. On the beaches, people were afraid, but the guards in their uniforms pointed their guns at them to make them get in the boats. This was guards a few days ago. We heard a while ago that coast guards were being trained, and we're hearing similar stories, though, in Brussels as well as on CNN. So there's nothing new. The trafficking in human beings, torture, have existed for years under Gaddafi too, and the EU tried to get an agreement then. There's no miracle solution, but I think enough speeches and not taking into account reality. The ICC has not got an in-depth investigation going. There's no genuine legal system. The detention camps are not under control. How can you evacuate them? And then having a centre in Tripoli to return men, women and children to Libya so that they can be tortured, sold as slaves, killed. How many more deaths will there be? And through money that we are spending, politicians who are making the situation worse in Niger too, you are accomplices of what's happening in the country. One day you will be held accountable, particularly by these thousands of people whose lives were lost, both at sea and in the deserts.
Thank you, Mrs. Vergia. Barbara Lochbihler has the floor for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To prevent irregular migration, the EU works with countries like Libya to make sure that there are guarantees in the case of a failure of the rule of law. The Amnesty report today shows us clearly that the EU bears responsibility for some of the human rights violations of refugees in Libya. And it's not just Amnesty saying this. The EU itself has said it, and the High Commissioner for Refugees has made this point publicly and with a degree of criticism. And if we look at the level of cooperation with Libya, the top priority must be to ensure that refugees themselves are at the centre, and the EU must make sure that it avails itself of every possibility to get all refugees and migrants released. This is something we must call for and support, particularly those who are under involuntary detention in Libya. And the EU member states must ensure that refugees are taken from Libya under resettlement programs, and it's not just sufficient for them to be transported back to Niger if we simply don't know the conditions under which they will be able to return to in their country of origin. We've heard report upon report about the involvement of the Libyan Coast Guard, and I think cooperation with Libyan actors, including the Coast Guard, must be given a new direction. Cooperation must be made dependent on work with international bodies and must be accompanied by them.
A következő felszólalónk 1 percre, Anna Mansour. Parancsolja.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam. I really do feel that we need to draw conclusions from this disaster in Libya. 2 conclusions. We need to shoulder our own responsibility, and we need to make sure that our own interests are taken into account in the area of foreign policy. I do apologize, Mrs. van Innetveld, but I do believe the European Union, the European coalition, has actually created this whole mess in Libya. And these partnerships and alliances, I think we've been using the wrong principles, and we need to look at our own interest as far as foreign policy is concerned. And that is what we need to be introducing into our foreign policies. Well, let us look at the effects of immigration, especially in the area of the Mediterranean. Look at the effect of immigration. Look at the measures that we take and take in account of what happens. We need to draw a lesson from what the ways in which we react to have an effect on the entire crisis. Thank you.
A következő felszólalónk 1 percre, Panzeri úr.
Thank you very much. Mr. Panzeri now for 1 minute.
Grazie.
Thank you. Commissioner, you said that the problems have not sprung up overnight, but infringements of human rights were present in Libya in the past, and that's true, but we need to ask ourselves whether the current containment policy solves or exacerbates the already existing problem. What we're seeing, in fact, is that this containment policy has 2 effects. It keeps people in Libya in unbearable conditions and has actually turned smugglers into people who catch people to sell them on the black market, which has serious consequences in Libya in trying to manage the migratory problem. I'm wondering whether the time has not come to think about the genuine consequences of this containment policy and to think about a different migration policy towards Libya on the part of the EU.
Köszönjük szépen. 1 percre Albion Guzmán asszonynak adom meg a szót.
Thank you very much. Ms. Albion Guzman for 1 minute.
Thank you. I just don't think we're focusing on this debate properly. Today we need to be talking about slavery, torture, rape, how refugees and immigrants are being tortured in Libya, because all of this has been documented. The debate is really, why is this happening? Promoted and paid by the European Union. It's the European Union that is funding a Libyan Coast Guard made up of militia, which have filled up boats with immigrants and that use violence systematically and persecute NGOs. It is the EU that is funding these refugee camps, where there is sexual abuse, where people are malnourished, and instead of opening legal channels, safe channels for these people to come to Europe, which a lot of people are saying, but nothing seems to be happening, one is deporting them so that they go back to poverty and war in their own countries. So the question is, who's going to go and join hands with the torturers when they go to the criminal courts to be sentenced? Is Mr. Tusk and Mrs. Mogherini, are they going to sit next to him?
Mr. Nirmina for 1.5 minutes. Thank you very much. The previous speakers have already expressed the dramatic conditions that we are witnessing in Libya, and it's been said that life in Libya is pretty much intolerable, that too little is being done, and the situation continues to deteriorate. It's not that surprising. Libya is a country where there is basically no functioning government, and refugees are really at the mercy of the situation, and the state authorities simply play fast and loose with traffickers and human beings. The people are trampled underfoot. Now, what is the EU or the European Parliament able to do? I think we need to express clear demands. There's no time left to negotiate. And we must ensure that the Libyan government is made to understand that the situation must now be terminated and the human rights of the people in question must be upheld. This must now have a stop to it, put to it, and people must be able to live under humane conditions. If not, then Europe will be risking its own value and its own soul, and we will be trampling over those things, and so therefore we mustn't give in to these demands.
Gracias, Presidenta. Sí, señor.
Thank you very much, Madam. Yes, Mr. Avramopoulos, Europe and the European Union is doing something, but we seem to be doing something wrong, because we support Mr. Salamé, the United Nations, who has a roadmap to restore a country which is broken into a million pieces, and we seem to be talking about a country with a government, a country we can call upon to do certain things, even though we don't even have anyone, an interlocutor who's actually governing the country. And the other special envoy of the United Nations of Human Rights, or Amnesty International, or Médecins Sans Frontières, they're criticizing us very severely, because our policy clearly is a reactive policy. And I'm not blaming you alone. I think a lot of the member states are to blame for this situation, and at the end of the day we're either using an Italian agenda or the German or the French agenda. 2017 was the year in which this European Parliament would have liked to stand beside the Libyans and to clearly indicate that the European Union does more than just programs to fund, but to give a message of hope, of a stability of the country. But this is not going to be possible, because precisely today we find ourselves in a situation where there is no government, lack of government, and if you look at the pictures that we've seen, the real situation of immigrants in a country, and I repeat, a country that we in the European Union are treating as if it were a country with a government. And the problem in Libya is that it's a country which is totally fragmented, which has been broken into pieces, and terrible things are happening in this country. But Libyan citizens are also faced with serious difficulties. So in the European Union we ought to be a little bit more ambitious when we want to develop a program for Libya, which is a comprehensive program. We don't just want to look at immigrants or slaves. No, Libya is a whole country with all its citizens, with all the people involved, and it needs to have a comprehensive program and a comprehensive budget, and not just bits and pieces, which I think is just breaking it up even further.
Thank
you very much. Mrs. Kienke, for 1.5 minutes now.
Thank you. Libya is a country that has not known peace for too many years, where there's total chaos and where it has an unknown future. Violence is the norm for thousands of people who need international protection. It's a country going through a humanitarian, security and political crisis that's unprecedented. And the European Union should be helping immediately, as should all the international community. We should act with emergency measures to respond to these emergency situations that both immigrants and Libyan citizens are subjected to, and ensure security and stability in the country. The challenge today is to ensure that the EU speaks with a single voice in Libya and fully takes on a guiding role in the peace process. Solidarity and shouldering of responsibilities. No member state should be forced to act on its own. Peace, reconciliation, reconstruction, these are vital if this country is to recover. We also need credible interlocutors if we are to dismantle the networks of smugglers. We have to bring an end to the atrocities that we are seeing on a daily basis and that are denounced by so many NGOs. But in the long term too, peace and reconciliation should be at the heart of our strategy, working towards a political dialogue, an inclusive dialogue, full respect of human rights, for reconstruction of the country and stabilisation of the whole area of the Mediterranean and the Sahel region. I'd conclude saying we need instruments for immigration so that it will be safe, regular and orderly. Thank you.
Következő felszólalunk Madame Dali 1 percre, parancsoljon.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Daly, for 1 minute.
Grazie.
Thank you. In fact, this evening in this parliament we heard how in Libya there are thousands of people who every day are being tortured and abused. There's no need to repeat that. However, the northerners in Europe or people from large countries don't really realize what's happening. I come from Malta, a neighboring country to Libya, and I understand that this is a situation which is critical, and it is a situation which has and will continue to have an enormous effect on the Mediterranean and the whole of the EU all of the EU. Africa is a huge continent. There are hundreds of thousands of people moving from one place to another every day. What we see in Libya is just at the tip of the iceberg. We just cannot continue focusing just on the problem at sea. Everyone has to make an effort, not only the EU, in order to address serious issues of political governance, climate change, and the lack of investment in the private sector. Otherwise, we will not solve this problem, and we cannot continue looking the other way to illegal immigration, trafficking of people, and criminal networks. At the same time, we have a duty to help our youth, the youth in this region. They are the catalyst to change, and we have to give them the necessary tools to help them rebuild their country once again. Thank you.
So that takes us through to the catch the eye procedure. We've built up a 25-minute lag, so I'm going to give the floor only to one person from each group, and first of all Mrs. Petir for 1 minute.
Prema navodima izvješća Amnesty International, Libya je puna.
The Amnesty International reports say that there are terrible things going on in Libya, particularly affecting religious minorities. Christians and refugees are being attacked and tortured and pursued by criminal bands, human traffickers, and also by state officers. And the international community has stood by as people have fled for the Italian coast. There has been this hatred against Christians, and even though people have been getting into boats in the middle of the night and dying in the Mediterranean, with the deaths reported of hundreds of innocent people, it's been said that they were praying to the wrong God for their salvation. So people are basically being murdered on the way to Europe. So the millions of euros that are flowing out now, which groups are they going to, and which groups are we supporting with them?
López Aguilar.
Well, just a few days ago, I was in Abidjan during the European Union African Summit. I listened to a very moving report from those people coming from Asia to Libya, from all parts of Africa. Torture and rape is not unique to this part of the world, but the way in which we've been able to hear about this through the mass media has clearly indicated that the European Union needs to take action. We need to carry out an international investigation of crimes against humanity. The European Union needs to promote, with the United Nations, an international action to look at the detention camps where there is mass violation of human rights. Wants to make sure that funding really meets its objectives, and we need to open legal channels, humanitarian corridors, and to make sure that we give opportunities to those people risking their lives. The next visit of a mission of the European Parliament to Libya would be a very good opportunity to change the way we are acting.
Another minute for Mr. Marias. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The dissolution, this breaking up of Libya is the result of the interference of foreign forces in the country, and this is deteriorated by the support of Turkey and by the collapse of the jihadists in Libya. The chaos in Libya led to a mass exodus of refugees towards the European Union. The European Union should have a system in order to return the illegal immigrants. At the same time, we should assure conditions, humane conditions for the return for all immigrants, and also for immigrants who are now in Libya, where they are faced as slaves in Libya. At the same time, from Italy and Greece, Mr. Avramopoulos, we should continue relocation to other countries of the European Union. We are worried, particularly, by the policy of Mr. Tusk. More or less, Mr. Tusk stated that he wants the abolition of this system of compulsory quotas of distribution of refugees to other member states of the European Union. This is something that the Greek people will not tolerate. Thank you.
Konecka asszony, parancsoljon öné a szó.
Děkuji, paní předsedající, vážené kolegyně, vážení kolegové. Dnešní zpráva od Amnesty International.
Thank you. Today, we've been reading the report of Amnesty International. Actually, we know a lot of this. Libya's in chaos. The consequences of the war, the very bad situation after the war, and the very complex structure of society. All of this has led to the fact that this country is unstable and that it won't be stable for a long time. In Libya, there is torture and people are being turned into slaves. The Coast Guard works with the smugglers. So basically the state gets money out of people's misfortune. I see that those people that have destroyed this country are now contributing to the fact that the country needs to be renewed. We need a diplomatic consensus. We need to make sure that in Libya we get a legal structure. Thank you. Mrs. Gomez.
There is the Libyan Coast Guard for the EU to train in Libya. What EU member states such as Italy have been paying is militia who fight each other to exploit the traffic of human beings, of arms, drugs, whatever. Yes, they operate horrendous detention camps and sell migrants and refugees as slaves, hati they call them, as in Gaddafi days. Infighting between militia competing to take care of migrants for the EU recently destroyed the city of Sabrata. By not opening safe and controlled ways for migrants and asylum seekers, the sad story is that Europe feeds the human traffickers' business. And it is big business. And Al-Qaeda and Daesh are taking the profits and bringing the security threat closer to us in Europe. It's time to stop the fiction that there is migration management in Libya and governance, be it from President Siraj or Criminal General Haftar. It's time that EU member states wake up and demand action at the UN together with the African Union to dispatch a robust international force well inside Libya to expel terrorist groups, bring about SSR-DDR for Libyans with Libyans, for without that there will be no governance in Libya. Yes, it will have to be with also with European boots on the ground, many boots on the ground. But after all, it is also about our own security that is at stake in Libya. The more we delay it, the more it will cost in African lives and possibly in European lives. Thank you.
Köszönjük szépen, és akkor Mr. Skripek 1 percre kérem, tartsa az időt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Skripek, for 1 minute. Please do try keep to speaking time.
Turmoil, and in 5 days' time, on the 17th of December, the 2-year mandate of the UN-appointed government will end. Without an official government, we can expect further destabilization and a rise in illegal immigration, as well as terror related in criminal activity. Instability in Libya will also affect Europe. It is imperative that the EU put more effort into understanding the actual situation on the ground and more resources into the pursuit of peace and stability. One positive development deserves mention, that is the group of different actors in Libya that have come together to form a EU-Libya Friendship Association that will be established in Malta in the coming months. It is important for the EU to back this effort, and I plead for this. Thank you.
Very much. Mr. Commissioner, thank you very much for listening so carefully, and I give you the floor, Mr. Dimitris Avramopoulos, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Indeed, I was listening to our colleagues very carefully, and I would like to express my thanks for their contribution to this debate. What I would like to say in the beginning is that finally we are all on the same side. We share the same concerns, and we try to find solutions. Some of these solutions are not common, but I think we have reached a level where we all understand that more action has to be undertaken, more responsibility to be shown, and more initiatives to be undertaken in order, first of all, to bring back stability in Libya. Dear Mrs. Valenciano, we are still in early stage. But yes, I agree with you that we have to work, we need to work in a balanced way with our partners, also to face a reality. Europe is in need of economic migrants, but for this purpose we need to enhance, to open legal pathways, legal channels, while in parallel reducing the irregular migration. As long as irregular migration is there, pictures like the ones we saw some days ago will be replicated. As you know, Member States keep the right to determine the volume of admission of third country nationals coming to work in their countries. It's their national competence and responsibility. As far as we are concerned, the Commission, we stand ready to coordinate and propose pilot projects with selected third countries and, of course, provide related financial support. These could be cases where Member States would engage themselves in hosting certain numbers of migrants coming through legal channels, in particular for economic purposes. We are now discussing with the Member States, and as you very rightly said, Ms. Sintel, my goal, Commission's goal, is the implementation of a comprehensive migration policy. The same as for the particular case of Libya. As Ms. Ayala said, we need a global solution addressing all problems and challenges. Dear colleagues, it is clear that we are all equally aware and shocked of the terrible, appalling and inhumane conditions in Libya. Yes, this has to stop, and to have to stop now. The situation in these detention centres is unacceptable. The European Union is pursuing efforts to support the establishment of a standardised process by the Libyan authorities through concrete projects. Now the question you would ask me, who are these Libyan authorities? The legitimate government of Tripoli is there, recognized by the United Nations, by the European Union. But does this government have the power? Does this government have full control of the situation in Libya? The answer is clear. No. Whereby migrants rescued by the Libyan Coast Guard are disembarked and taken to reception centres that meet international humanitarian standards. And once again, we have to praise and commend IOM and UNHCR for what they are doing on the ground, putting even the lives of their people there in danger. The European Union is actively supporting the development in Libya of alternatives to detention. Recently, the Libyan government agreed to allow UNHCR to open a transit and departure facility to Tripoli for people in need of international protection. IOM is also working with partner non-governmental organisations on pilot projects to promote safe spaces, which would have the capacity to host a small group of vulnerable women and children. As regards now the use of funds, we are monitoring, as in every case, how they are used. We are not aware so far of misuses, but ready to listen to concrete evidences. Dear colleagues, fanciful statements about complicity and blame might grab headlines, but they are not helping anyone, not least the migrants themselves. The situation in Libya is not bad because of the European Union. This discourse has to stop. On the contrary, the situation is slightly better compared to the recent past, thanks to the European Union, and we shall continue working on the ground in order to support these people. You described the situation in Libya before. I will pick some of your words, because finally, Libya is lacking all elements to be qualified as a state. The situation is chaotic. There is no strong interlocutor from the other side. The country is divided. Militia, 20 approximately independent militia operates uncontrolled on the ground. The country is the paradise of smugglers and an open corridor for irregular migration. We all here share the same objective. First and most important is to save lives and provide these desperate people with support. The European Union, its institutions and its member states are working to achieve it, pure and simple. We do so by first stopping people drowning in the Mediterranean, and you see the numbers have gone down drastically. Evacuating them from disastrous conditions in Libya and offering them safe and legal pathways to come to Europe. I will not repeat what I said in the beginning, but it is clear that we have a lot more work to be getting on with to make it better still. I count also on the members of this House to help us advance, because what we have achieved in general migration from the very beginning of the life of our term as European Parliament, as Commission, it has been achieved thanks to our cooperation. And once again, I would like to express my gratitude to all of you for your support. Because today, the European Union can be proud for its policy and for the adoption of the principles upon which this policy and this strategy is based. The MEPs who were here in the previous Parliament, they know very well that there was no migration policy. There was no migration strategy. Just an embryo somewhere in Brussels, but not something clear and concrete. So we have all shared this effort to achieve what we have done. But yes, we have to do more, but we'll do it together. This is not a national, regional, or a European problem. As I said before, it's a global one. And I was more than happy 1 year ago when I proposed to the former Secretary General of the United Nations to hold this extraordinary General Assembly, and he did it in New York. So in this way, we made this issue a global one. So it has become a global responsibility. And we are all responsible globally on what is happening in the Mediterranean and in Libya. The European Union has taken its part. All others should do the same. So, before I sign off, I would like to call for more and strong joint cooperation of all of us, all actors and partners, since we all aim, as I said before, the same objective: to bring back stability in the region, to bring back stability in Libya, to be the ones that will contribute in bringing unity in Libya, because the country is divided and fragmented, to work on the principle of solidarity towards these desperate people, but also among us, and finally produce practical results by giving practical support of the people in need. Thank you very much for your attention.
Very much for your speech. And with your speech we are closing the debate and we are going to the next item of today. It's Madam Christodoulou report. With her leadership we are going to start for 4 minutes. The floor is yours. And the title of your report, a 2016-os éves jelentés az emberi jogok és a demokrácia helyzetéről a világban és az Európai Unió.
And your report on human rights